And good morning. It's always a pleasure to have Karen Onen with me. She is from the East Central Regional Transportation Coordinating Council, and we're talking about transit. It is the topic under a big umbrella here in Minnesota and actually reaching out into the country, to be quite honest. And this morning, Karen, who is our guest today?
Well, we're lucky enough today to have Tom Gottfried, who is with MnDOT, and he is the executive director of MCOTA, which is the Minnesota Council on Transportation Access, which has a big umbrella over the RTCCs and the legislative policies. I'm really excited to talk with Tom this morning. Tom, how are you?
I am fine, and I apologize for my rough voice. I had this last weekend with my grandkids, and sometimes they wandered off further than I could yell. So anyway, and I certainly am older man, so I can't chase after them. But they were very responsive. They said, "Oh, Grandpa, you can call a long way," and I go, "Yeah, but I don't know if my voice can handle that much." But here we are.
Well, we wanted to ask you a little bit about your background. Who are you, and why are you involved with transportation?
I'm the executive director of Minnesota Council on Transportation Access. All well and good to hear that, but that doesn't really mean anything until you have some kind of application for it. And as Karen did indicate, it is a wide umbrella. We represent 13 state agencies and the governor's office as well. It is attached to the MCOTA. And the primary focus is policies and circumstances or situations or statutes or laws or rules that get in the way of the most effective and the most efficient way for us to transport and move people about the state and do their business, everyday business, important business of getting to jobs and work and transporting your grandkids where they need to be and managing your health care and managing your access to medications and just the whole gamut of what does it mean to actually make transportation. Most citizens in Minnesota say, well, it's not a big decision. I go out, I hop in my car like I am right now. You hear the background noise. By the way, hands-free, so we're good. And to that end, and make their decision to transport themselves from point A to point B. And the issue is that there are many, many, many people in various different times, not all the time, that have transportation problems, whether they can afford it, the timeliness of it associated with how to get where you need to be when you want to be there on time. I'm fortunate. I have a vehicle. I can do hands-free. I'm having this conversation with you while I'm transporting myself to my next appointment, which starts very shortly here. But I'm very happy to be with you today, and this is giving us an opportunity to address some of these issues that have been around for a very long time. And people always point out, hey, COVID really, is the thing that defined this. And to be honest with you, this is a problem long before COVID showed up. COVID, what it did is pointed out the incredible gaps, large, huge gaps of various different people having transportation. And even when we're supposed to be sheltering in place, it doesn't stop the fact that you have to get your groceries. You still have to feed yourself. You still have to do some level of work and interaction and move about. And that's what this is about. It's more than public transportation. It includes public transportation, but it's more than that. So a lot of times we go from using the word transit to using the word transportation because it's much more diverse than just strictly, am I going to be able to hop on a bus? The answer is yes, it's hopefully going to be available to you, but if it's not, what do we do? And how do we address that? And what options are available to you to address that issue?
Has MCOTA been in place for a long time, or why does it seem like they've really stepped up further than before?
The issue really comes down to is MCOTA came into place in 2010, and it had a very specific legislative charge. And it was mostly that point in time to look, research, and identify and come up with resolutions that would actually, solve potential everyday citizens of Minnesota's transportation issues and all facets of it. And it's very complex, and it has some moments that's very challenging. So after, 10 years, I was hired last year, that it became pretty conclusive that we were coming around circle again and again to the same problems. As a matter of fact, there was a request for another study that something that was studied in 2011 to become around in 2019, 8 years later, to research it again. And I think the council kind of came to a conclusion to saying, we're just cycling through this. We're not really getting closure on any of these events. So when the federal government FTA basically put together a program for mobility management, in there was some flexibility. So there was at the federal level a real concern about the complexity of transportation and transportation options, especially for certain populations, people with disabilities, elderly, individuals who only had a single car in their household, whatever the circumstances that was limiting their transportation options. So we need to look at mobility as a holistic point of view. And that started to come to fruition probably about 2015, 2016, and has been really starting getting some traction. Various different issues, obviously limited resources and that type of thing sometimes caused us to delay that kind of conversation. But fundamentally, the council kind of came to the conclusion, let's stop looking at the problem again and again and again and not come up with resolutions. And hence the birth of regional transportation coordinating councils, which with MnDOT, we have to do acronyms. They're called RTCCs.
The RTCCs, I think, have been a great outcome of the local human service transportation plan that was done in 2017 was the last one. And I think working hand in hand with MCOTA as well as the Minnesota Volunteer Driver Coalition, everything just is sort of gelling and coming together, and communications and the networking. And as you said, some of the things that have come around again and again are not going to, because we're dealing with each one of them through the RTCCs, and MCOTA is sort of directing the RTCCs as to what we should be doing.
It's a partnership relationship because it's also the RTCCs, the Regional Transportation Coordinating Councils, that is representative of your region and your communities and people that have to deal with transportation. All transportation is local. We at the state or federal level could look at this and say, well, it's kind of a theoretical type of thing. No, it's not. The decision that you showed up to work this morning was a transportation decision, how you were going to do what you need to do. Do I go there? Do I telecommute versus I actually hop in my car and go where I need to go and do what I need to do? Fundamentally, that decision really always starts at the local level. And MnDOT and with MCOTA, as well as the local coordination plans, thank you, Karen, for bringing that up. It's a really big effort that we're going through right now because we're revisiting that local coordination plan. But here's the difference in the way we did it in 2017 versus in 2022. The answer is we now have a number of RTCCs in place across the state who are already been working on various different elements. And there has been some small check boxes and saying, yep, we got that. Yep, we got that. Mm-hmm. We're still working on that. Okay, we're still working on that. And this is a priority. And even though there's a theme amongst all the RTCCs across the state and TCAPs in the metropolitan area, there's a very similar theme to them about how do we better utilize the equipment that we currently have right now? How can we be more efficient with how to get people from point A to point B? Mostly, how do we communicate what is already in existence to the people that don't know that service is already available to them? Mm-hmm. And that was a huge effort by the RTCCs, and that's kind of a checkbox that has done. Now there is these provider inventories that have been created across the state where all you have to do is contact the RTCC, and they'll give you all the various different potential resources for you as an individual to utilize a service as it might. At the same time, it might not solve every problem. It gives us an opportunity with the RTCCs to log that, to acknowledge that, and say, you know what, we still have a gap here. This is still an issue. And that's where this is where the partnership works. RTCs bring that information back to MCOTA, and MCOTA looks at it and say, oh, okay, we're going to give some priority. And one of the things we did in this last session, success, was the volunteer driver program, both a conversation that was happening relative to insurance and the ability to get insurance and the concerns about volunteer drivers being considered for hire. And anytime they got compensation like that, then the insurance company would turn around and say, oh, well, now you're going to be subject to commercial rates, which were much higher than what an individual would pay. And, of course, that was basically discouraging any volunteer to be a volunteer. that has been addressed in this last session, so good news for that. And that was a whole effort of the RTCCs, local coordination planning processes that were occurring before that, and also the Coalition of Volunteer Driver did a great job of advocacy as we pulled this forward into the session, and we ultimately came out of session and getting that language corrected. Insurance companies are now going to see reimbursement does not mean for hire, and therefore the individual is not doing commercial service just because they're doing a volunteer driver service.
Mm-hmm.
And to that end, that was a very good success. Another small success on that is Minnesota at the state level has acknowledged that the reimbursement is not taxable income and has decided to give a credit back to that. The unfortunate thing is Minnesota is Minnesota. It's not the United States. It's not at the federal level. And the federal level still acknowledges that reimbursement is actually potentially taxable. And that has not been solved, but that's next on our agenda. So it's not like we got more work to do.
It'd be nice to get some other states involved because it is a federal issue. It isn't just Minnesota. And changing that 14 cents a mile reimbursement for volunteer drivers to the business rate of 56 cents a mile would make so much of a difference to so many volunteers and organizations due to the tax implications. So,
Definitely. Thank you.
I'm assuming, so you have all these RTCs, there's how many around the state of Minnesota, and they must have similar Karens that are doing what she's doing. And ultimately, I'm thinking for you, Tom, ultimately you want to have a map or these booklets for the entire state of Minnesota and then be able to get that out so it isn't just for people in our area. Then they can reach out to the bigger overall with all this coordination. Is that something I'm assuming, Tom, that's kind of your ultimate goal, right?
That is a goal, and it's actually a near-term goal. We hope that in the next year that we will have RTCC, year-ish, 18 months is probably the time frame, that we'll have RTCCs in all 87 counties, or all 80 counties. And then the metropolitan area currently has total coverage with, we call them TCAPs, and because, MnDOT has to have a different kind of acronym for everything. Long story short, they're basically regional transportation coordinating councils at a county level, because we know Hennepin County is as big as 15 counties in greater Minnesota. But the point being is it's still an important piece of that discussion. The conversation is to have that and is ultimately the answer that we're trying to do that. It is not unusual for somebody to be sitting in Karen and Mora right now and say, I have a grandparent or a parent or whatever that I really need to move from Morris up to Fargo, okay? And they need some regular transportation. Well, that's not in Mora's backyard. That's in another region's backyard. Mm-hmm. And that's where we are starting to work together, and Karen and all the other Karens that are working with RTCCs, and not everybody is as wonderful as Karen. And yes, I'll go on the record of saying that. But each one of them bring their own unique style and talents and capabilities, and collectively, I could not be more pleased with working with the team that we've got pulled together and we call them mobility managers or coordinators. We have a number of them all over the state, and they're very talented, very dedicated, and very willing to do this work. And it's not easy because sometimes you don't have a great answer for somebody's transportation need. And the answer is we will figure out how to make it work. This is why that partnership building, the thing that Karen's been working on so diligently for the last 2-3 years now, is to build the local providers that have some skills and abilities and capacities to do some transportation that might be outside of their normal way of doing business. And that's the key element here. This is where the innovation comes in. How do we take where we are and move us to the next location, next moment in time, and say, how do we address this much more effectively and more efficiently and do what we need to be doing?
We have a portal now. It's eastcentraltransit.com, and there will be links on there, and there's contact information on there for me, so you can reach out and ask the questions that I can then follow through and ask Tom. And I just wanted to thank you so much, Tom, for being on here. It's just been really, really interesting, as always. And thank you, Robin, for having us.
It's been a pleasure, Tom. Again, appreciate your time, and take care of your voice.
Well, thank you. I think the best thing for me to do is stop talking.
We'll let you do that, Tom. And again, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
And again, this has been partially funded by MnDOT.